Hello, welcome to my stream. My name is Nathan Hatch. I am an advocate for health and wellness and a writer about health and wellness. Today we are going to be talking about happiness. If you haven't been here before, I usually let people trickle in, and we'll get the stream started in about 10 minutes. I'm going to write that. Oops. Not that thing. Where's my chat? Where's the chat? Here's the chat. Okay. Stream is working well. Getting started shortly. If you want, you can jump ahead when we start, when the starting soon screen disappears. Or you can hang around for some pre-stream banter and fun. But I'll be back in a second. And we'll get started in about 10 minutes. All right, I'm back. Enjoying my coffee. Speaking of happiness. Coffee has been a lifeline for me for many years. And for anybody, you know, who wonders, yes, coffee is a drug. It's not like it's not a drug. When a lot of people say that, though, they, you know, they're kind of implying that it's bad to have drugs. It is not necessarily. But problems with addiction and stuff are rampant. But, you know, nobody's ever died from a coffee overdose. Can you guys hear me all right? My levels are going fine, but I think there's only like 2 people here so far. It is a Saturday, so we probably won't have a huge crowd. Not that I ever draw huge crowds. Let's see. I need to rearrange some things here on my desk. So also, if you don't know, I also answer questions, and we chat about whatever you guys want to chat about. Sometimes it's a little bit more. Hey, tech lead. Sometimes it's a little bit more structured. Today's going to be a bit more casual. I was going to go outside for some sun, but the clouds rolled in, so lucky you guys, I'm streaming. Lucky me, I have something fun to do. Tech lead, you've read my previous editions, said one time you eat watermelon and left side pain was gone. Have you found out what happened? I know that's not exactly what I said, actually. You probably, I was probably talking about my cancer, and craving watermelon, like one night when I was recovering from cancer therapy. In my book, I mentioned the thing that did that was casein protein, actually, not watermelon. Although watermelon is very helpful for a lot of health issues. Yeah. Like, so I was, it was early in my recovery. This was back in 2014, I think. No, sorry, 2015, because I was 34, and like, I'd been making pretty good progress. I think at the time I had probably already gotten the casein, and I was like doing well, and but just like, it was like 1 a.m. one night, and I had this overwhelming urge for watermelon, and it was so powerful that I couldn't sleep. I was just like, my brain was just like wanting watermelon, and there was a grocery store open 24 hours not too far from where I live, so I went out and got in the car and I drove down and got a watermelon at like 1:32 in the morning. Oh, it was so good too. It was a nice, good organic watermelon, really red and juicy and yummy. And since I wrote that, hey Meland, I was hoping you'd show up. I have since done a lot more research to a lot more things since that first edition. And watermelon is actually specifically very important for our health. Watermelon, so there's this amino acid called citrulline in our bodies, and it's extremely important for cardiovascular function, libido, immunity, like immune responses, tissue regeneration, it gets made into like, okay, so there's several amino acids that are related to citrulline, arginine, proline, ornithine, and I think there might be others that I don't remember or know about, and they can all be interconverted into each other. And also citrulline, or there are others related to, through the citrulline pathway, can be converted into nitric oxide. And a lot of people don't know that one of the most aggressive consumers of citrulline and nitric oxide is the brain. And we evolved in a area of the world, Central Eastern Africa, on the shores of ancient Lake Megachad. And if you know the meme that sounds like, I always think it's really funny. That's where watermelon also evolved. Watermelon is from Africa, actually, and we would have had access to watermelon as a species throughout our evolutionary history. And it seems that our large brain size is actually in great part due to the availability of citrulline through cucurbits, which watermelon is a cucurbit from the family Cucurbitacea. And anyway, so and then watermelon is also really high in important carotenes like lycopene and sugar, and you can and as I've done more research and discovered how important those nutrients are for various parts of our physiology, you could accurately describe people often as having a watermelon deficiency. So I think it's really funny. But yeah, so I say that I mentioned that now in my more like Giga Chat. Yeah, yeah, Sam. Hi Jay. Yeah, I tried. This time I tried to give people fair warning. Since I've been working on my book updates, I don't have a lot of time for streaming, or I don't think about it, and my brain is always preoccupied on research that I'm doing. And so I haven't really streamed very much. But as my more recent research winds down, I have a little bit more time to stream. So I've been trying to be more, instead of just spontaneous last minute. I mean, this was kind of last minute, but I at least got an hour's notice out. I don't know who Nutrition Detective is, Sam, but yes, some people think carotenes are bad. Even Ray Pete, a lot of you guys know that a lot of my work is founded on Ray Pete's work. And Ray Pete has even talked about harms of carotene. And guess what, Sam? They're not wrong. For instance, like Ray Pete says, talks about how like carotenes have potential to be oxidizers, and they absolutely do. The issue though is the application of that knowledge. The assumption from Ray Pete and other people who have heard those things is that you should then avoid carotene. But carotene is actually extremely important for our health, and its antioxidant and pro-oxidant nature is actually integral to its function in our body. Here, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'm gonna switch to the start screen. Welcome everybody. The same thing that makes carotene a potential oxidizer is also why it's important in our body, actually. So I found a study not too long ago that showed that the antioxidant nature of carotene is actually activated by light exposure. They studied plants, and they showed that in darkness, carotene did not function as an antioxidant. And so reactive oxidation species rose during darkness. And then as soon as light was turned on the plant, then carotene consumes reactive oxidant species. And then carotene actually can utilize those reactive oxygen species in certain pathways where, there's actually lots of pathways in our body that utilize oxidation, such as the entire immune system, but also in cleaving. So for instance, actually, the reaction that creates vitamin A from beta carotene, from provitamin A carotenes, beta carotene produces 2 molecules of vitamin A, whereas other carotenes only produce 1. Provitamin A carotenes only produce 1 molecule of vitamin A. That's actually achieved through the oxidation of those carotenes. The oxidative reaction cleaves those carotenes into vitamin A, and then that's where we get vitamin A. And vitamin A is absolutely crucial for thyroid and thyroid hormone and sex hormones, and you can't make thyroid hormone or sex hormones without vitamin A. And various carotenes also have different effects and functions in different areas of the body. For instance, I saw studies a long time ago that showed that talked about how different carotenes, like for instance, like one, I don't remember which ones are which, but one is more important for testicles, and one is more important for ovaries. And so depending on the specific physiology of different parts of the body, different carotenes play roles that are both antioxidants and oxidants. And the light sensitive nature of carotenes that make them spontaneously absorb and oxygen is why they can potentially be bad, but not if they're eaten in whole food forms in the body, because then they're not really exposed to oxygen until they get into the body, where they then act as antioxidants and protect the body from oxidative damage. And then once they are oxidized, then are also used in other oxidative reactions. But studies show that supplemental vitamin A and carotenes are very often harmful, and that reason is because the manufacturing process oxidizes them before you administer them into the body. So if you take supplemental vitamin A or carotenes, you're actually usually supplementing oxidative stress into your body rather than antioxidants. And studies that show harmful effects of carotenes and vitamin A, which have erroneously led a lot of people to believe that they're harmful, come from supplemental carotenes and vitamin A, not whole food sources. So they produce inappropriate results inappropriate for practical application and understanding. So that's why, like, my work is very hard because science is really complex, and you have to understand context in every single thing that you're talking about and listening too. Also, because I'm just a dumb person, I often misspeak, and I spent 15 years as an alcoholic. I'm missing brain cells. I even say the wrong things when I mean sometimes when I mean something else. I might use the wrong word, or like I might forget something, or interchange something. Be a little bit dyslexic or ADHD about stuff. And so, like, it's really, really important that to understand things as much as possible, by being inquisitive and asking questions and questioning things that you're taught and told. And like, carotene has been so vital for my recovery, and improving things like libido and mood and energy and wellness. And it's even more, my update that I'm releasing in a few weeks really even more emphasizes carotene and explains these nuances about carotene and vitamin A even better too. And it's even more than what I recommended previously in my book, because the nature of carotenes actually have not been quite understood. And I actually have a really, really, really really quite incredible discovery and announcement in regard to carotene, but I'm going to save that for the book release, so you'll have to be excited about that. But anyway, but you don't really need to know right now, because like, you can just eat lots of carotenes and you'll get the but when I release my update, it's really exciting. So anyway, so so I wanted to just talk about happiness today, because I was having a great morning and I was listening to Betty Who. If you don't know who Betty Who is, her music is nothing but pure happiness. She's really great. I love her so much. And I was dancing around my apartment, and I thought, why not? I mean, why not specifically talk about this? Like, I have streams on here, and content on my website that talk about things like depression and things that are related to depression, like alcoholism, addiction, and trauma. But very often when we talk about problems, and even if we do talk about solutions, they're not really focused on solutions or like alternatives to those states. So it's very useful sometimes to talk about what you want to achieve and what you want to gain for yourself in your life. A lot of because of my book, and those of you who consume my work and stuff know that I was raised in a very conservative religious household. They practice Mormonism. There was a lot of trauma and abuse that happened in my home. I am gay as well, so that was not compatible. And my parents really abused me and neglected me as a child, and I tried to commit suicide at the age of 21, and was just tormented with depression and anxiety and everything that goes along with that, and accompanying also metabolic health problems. Because like I mentioned also in my stream on depression, that depression never comes in isolation. You usually have other metabolic problems that accompany it, because depression is actually even though it does it is also caused by trauma and psychological stress. Hi, Jorg. Welcome. I haven't seen you for a while, Jorg. Welcome back. So, it is actually a metabolic disease, because even if you have lots of trauma and stress, that translates and results into endocrinological stress, that alters your hormone balance and your neurological transmitters. And so that, so depression is also a metabolic disease as well as a psychological one, mostly a metabolic one. And so I really struggled with depression for many, many years, and I used alcohol, mostly a little bit of drugs as coping mechanisms to survive, before I ended up getting sober in 2015. after my life fell apart, and I'm not sober anymore because I discovered how to cure what causes and how to cure alcoholism and addiction. But and I mean, and it works. So like my last drink was in, I mean, I don't like count when my last drink was. Like I like alcohol, like beer is fun to drink. But like my last drink was just in like January because I don't even really think about it very much. If I had more of a social life, I would totally like probably be drinking a little bit more that I did. But that's how well my my this because it is a cure. I mean, a cure is a cure. So like it I used to be like a bottle of tequila every 2 or 3 days, kind of drunk. I mean, and it was often more than that. But I would try not to drink, and so I would go like 1 or 2, maybe 3 days without drinking, and then I couldn't handle it anymore, and I'd have to like down an entire bottle of tequila. Um, and that was also really problematic. Like, I mean, I drove drunk and stoned into a concrete wall on the freeway at 60 miles an hour once. And that wasn't even enough to help me to recognize that I had a problem with alcohol because I was such an alcoholic. And I talk about this in my book that alcohol is alcohol actually inactivates this neurotransmitter called acetylcholine in the brain, which is the root of alcoholism and addiction. And this neurotransmitter, like I talk about in my book, and and there's a stream on alcoholism and addiction as well. And so when you're drinking, acetylcholine is also the chemical that facilitates consciousness and learning and memory, which are all actually the same thing. There's actually no difference between consciousness, learning, and memory. And since and alcohol actually inactivates acetylcholine, so you don't actually learn lessons while you're drunk, and that's why people who are alcoholics continue to make really poor choices and endanger other people, is because uh, the chemical that would imprint cause and consequence onto the brain is actually being inactivated by the alcohol. And that's also why if you drink enough, you can black out, because it inactivates acetylcholine, which is the facilitator of consciousness. Um, but yeah, so so my life fell apart, and a lot of you guys know that story. And because I, all through until I was like 35 years old, I just never thought that like real happiness was ever an option for me. I was raised, in a really bigoted, awful home, and my family had rejected me, kicked me out of the family when I was like 18. And I had a really hard time making friends and establishing myself in the world. And I wandered around and tried lots of things. Like I learned yoga at a really young age, and that was helpful. And then I learned Vedic meditation when I was like 26, and I practiced meditation religiously for several years. And meditation was really nice. And actually, I mean, and it does work, but only when you're doing it. If you have significant metabolic and mental illness, meditation can't fix those things. All it does is provide you some temporary reprieve from the condition. So while you're meditating is really, really calming and wonderful, but as soon as you're done, all those emotions and problems start coming back, because a lot of the feelings that we attribute to depression and a lack of happiness are actually caused by hormones. They're endocrinological, and lots of factors actually affect them. So one of the first things to talk about when talking about happiness is actually talking about the difference between happiness and vitality. I mention Andrew Solomon in my book, who is a public speaker and mental health advocate, who's a really great person. He has a TED Talk, and he talks about how he struggled to be happy for many, many, many years, and one of his, also similarly like my experience, one of the reasons that it was so difficult for him to find is that the opposite of depression isn't actually happiness; it's actually vitality, which is energy, which is physical wellness. Because our body runs on energy, you can't actually feel well and happy and alive if your body isn't able to make sufficient energy to facilitate those pathways. Ray Peat talks about a lot of this and a lot of his work, in not in these terms though, but he talks about how people with high energy are more happy and calm because the ample amount of energy that their cells produce also produces calmness and relaxation. That is a gross oversimplification of how it works, but it is how it works. And one of the reasons for a long time in my life that I could not find peace and calmness in my life was because my body was so tormented with metabolic disease and mental health stress that I was never going to find happiness or peace before I resolved those issues first. And that's one of the reasons why my book is structured the way that it is. So, like, we go through chapters like what is a proper human diet? What are actually the benefits of sugar? How the vilification of certain foods isn't very helpful, how there's actually quite a bit of misleading science, or science that's done by inept or even unscrupulous actors, because there's just as much fraud and malfeasance and ineptitude in science as there is in any other profession. And how to actually find information that's actually useful for us and in resolving these problems. Because in order to be happy, you first have to take care of your physical body. You have to rebalance your endocrine system so that your levels of adrenaline and cortisol drop, and your levels of dopamine and oxytocin and progesterone and pregnenolone rise. Pregnenolone is the master hormone of the body, from which most other hormones are derived. Not steroids like adrenaline, but cortisol, for instance, comes from pregnenolone. So does testosterone and estrogen and all the other related estrogens and androgens and corticosteroids. And if your body is not able to make enough pregnenolone, you become highly deficient in hormones that are required for cells to function properly. So, of course, you will experience physical stress. And in response to physical stress, our body tries to raise levels of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol in order to counteract that metabolic stress and help your body produce enough energy. So number one, the number one way to promote normal endocrine balance in order to reduce that kind of stress is just to fucking eat food. Like the number one rule of happiness is a full stomach. And everyone knows this too. I mean, even if you have eating disorders or you diet a lot, when you eat a good piece of bread or a bowl of ice cream or drink a really yummy soda, you feel great. It makes you feel really good. One of the problems with this, though, is that we have been conditioned by our society and our environment and other traumatized people that's like a trick somehow, like your body's trying to trick you into eating sugar. No, that's not how the body works. The body is not some nefarious trickster who's trying to dupe you into being fat. Your body, first and foremost, as a living organism, is trying to help you survive, not to trick you. Your body is just as interested in being alive, and more so, usually in most cases, as you are. Our body has evolved over millions of years to develop these pathways and instincts that help us facilitate human survival. That's why we're a species on this planet, and such a numerous one as that as well. But we get trained and conditioned by lots of prejudices and biases in our environment, in our social groups and institutions, to misunderstand what's actually going on in those things. So we then try to starve ourselves, and then your body's instincts start to tell you that this is harmful for your state of health, and you can only resist that for so long, right? So then we end up doing this yo-yo back and forth between starving ourselves and eating, and that's extremely stressful. Every time that you go for if you go for let's say if you have any kind of stress at all in your life, like if mental stress or physical stress and illness, if you go for more than 3 or 4 hours without eating, your body is already releasing adrenaline. And cortisol then always follows adrenaline after adrenaline, because the job of adrenaline is to release sugar from storage in your body tissues, so that you have adequate sugar circulation to keep you alive. And if you continue not to eat, like when I was younger, one of the things that I would do, because I wanted to be skinny and sexy and fit, was I would wake up every morning and not eat breakfast, and then I would go train. I would go to the gym, or I would go to my swimming teams that I practice with, or I'd go for a run. And I thought I was being really disciplined because I was ignoring my body's need for food, and then also working out and and burning more calories and sugar, in order to get fit. But the body needs sugar to run properly. So you can't actually be happy and have vitality if you're depriving your cells of the fuel sources that they need in order to actually operate correctly. But this stream is about happiness. So basically, like, the difference between vitality and happiness is that vitality has to occur first. And, that's the entire point of my book. And also, like, many of the streams that are on here, and the articles that are on my website, depression and stuff like that. All that information is all about vitality, which is the first requirement on the path to happiness. Your body has to be well and fed, and in order to lower the stress hormones that make us feel uncomfortable and restless. And also, and another really important factor in that too is that a lot of people don't comprehend that emotions are hormones. Like, emotions are not just some nebulous, spiritual, amorphous phenomenon. They're literally what hormones do. So, for instance, adrenaline is the hormone of excitement and anger and rage. So a little bit of adrenaline is a lot of excitement. You can get really excited. But a lot of adrenaline starts to make you really fucking pissed off. And if you get super high amounts of adrenaline, you just go into rage. That's why when you have the fight or flight response as a human being, either to, antagonism by other people, or you run into, like, one time when I was a kid, I was walking home from junior high, and we had this alley behind our house, and that I'd walk home every day. And I heard this little rustling, and it was a thin alley, and it was lined by lots of, like, weeds and bushes and like sheds and fences, and it was very tight. And I'm walking along, and I hear this little rustle, and I look down to my left, and this little skunk head pops out of some bushes underneath a shed. And I mean, it was so fucking cute, but it was also a skunk. And I was also like, wait, how old are you in junior high? Because I was like, I think it was 8th grade, however old you are in 8th grade. Is that like 12 or 13? I'd never seen a skunk in person before. So I like my fight or flight response just took over. And I just, like, I've never run so fast in my life. I just, like, this skunk is going to spray me. And because it was literally just like 2 feet away from me. And it was really cute though, because it popped its head out from underneath a shed, and it was very Disney-esque, like in these really pretty green grass weeds. But I still hightailed it out of there because it was a fucking skunk. and so my adrenaline and cortisol are, like, pumping because adrenaline, the main function of adrenaline is to release sugar from storage, and sugar powers your cells. So you get a huge surge of adrenaline when you need to, like, if you're in danger or you have some kind of exciting event, so that your cells have plenty of sugar in order to meet the demands of the moment. But because adrenaline release also increases when you, like, undereat, and whether it's intentional or not, that's why you also get angry when you're hungry. For many years, so I've had several people in my life who were actually bipolar. And this preceded, this also even preceded my work. And so when I talk about bipolar disorder in my book being similar to depression and PTSD and anxiety issues and stuff like that, and ADHD, one of the things that I noticed was that people who are bipolar don't often notice that they haven't eaten for a very long time. They actually, like, I don't know what causes it, but a lot of people, they just don't, they when a normal person is hungry, they immediately equate that to, I need to eat food. But people with bipolar disorder don't seem to actually make that connection, and they will feel really angry when their blood sugar drops, and not have hunger impulses to actually eat, which would otherwise bring down your adrenaline. So it's very difficult for people to often make this connection that feelings and emotions are hormones. Um, Dopamine, I talk about, like, a lot of people think of the hormone serotonin being happiness, but it actually is not. That's actually a misconception in the medical industry. Early and since the time of early depression and manic depressive disorder research and treatment, a serotonin was fingered almost immediately as an option for treatment, because in experimenting with hormone regulating compounds and stuff, it would produce results. Like, it would, and this was back when depression was considered manic depression only. Like, it wasn't depression alone. It was people who were manic depressive, which we now call bipolar disorder. Giving them compounds and medicines that raised serotonin lowered their manic states. And so then that was taken as evidence of it being a cure for manic depression. And then that organically evolved into serotonin medications being the cure for depression. But that's not actually true. Serotonin is actually a hormone of torpor, and it's associated with states of hibernation in mammals, especially. And for instance, when a bear or another hibernator approaches wintertime, the reduction in certain wavelengths of light because of the sun lowering in the horizon triggers a spike in both serotonin and melatonin that then induce the hibernation response. So administering and manipulating serotonin in human beings seemed to have an appearance of therapy for conditions like for depression, because it is an anesthetizing torporific agent. The role of serotonin and its derivative melatonin, and yes, melatonin is derived from serotonin. A lot of people don't know that. Is to reduce cellular respiration, to reduce the rate that cells consume energy and nutrients, because as being part of our strategy for pathways that are related to hibernation, for instance, like the body has to have different strategies for both increasing metabolic rate when it is needed and decreasing it when it is not needed. And serotonin and melatonin perform that function. Melatonin is often touted as an antioxidant, but in fact, it's not really an antioxidant. The way that melatonin achieves antioxidant functions is by turning off pathways that risk or produce oxidative reactive oxygen species, which are pathways like fatty acid oxidation or cellular respiration in the body. All metabolism in the body produces reactive oxygen species. So serotonin and melatonin function by turning down those functions in order to protect the body during times when either there is high reactive oxygen species generation and oxidative damage, or the environment is not conducive to a high metabolic state, such as during light deprivation and food insecurity and things like that. And for that reason, serotonin and melatonin are also the feelings of guilt and shame and those related feelings. One of the reasons that cocaine is such an attractive drug of abuse is because cocaine directly inhibits serotonin and raises dopamine. And because cocaine inhibits serotonin, and serotonin is also the hormone of guilt and shame, it temporarily relieves people of the feelings that are associated with consequences from either doing bad things or being or having being indoctrinated with shame and guilt. So you get a lot of people who were raised in really abusive religious households loving cocaine because it relieves them of the trauma that resulted from being raised in an environment that used shame as a manipulation and abuse tool. Hey, Phallus. Good evening to you. Thanks. Yeah, I love them too. It's a lot of fun. Nice to have you here. So serotonin is actually is the feeling. Serotonin does function in our body to facilitate feelings and emotions of shame and guilt, and remorse. And progesterone is the feeling of empathy, or facilitates empathy. When I experimented with progesterone during my cancer recovery, it made me feel feelings much more deeply. And this is also one of the reasons why people who have anhedonia, which is like a lack of pleasure and lack of feelings, experience that, is because your body isn't producing hormones that facilitate feelings, because of dietary stress and environmental stress. And because hormones are feelings, people with with certain types of metabolic disease don't feel feelings. When I was younger, I pretty much only ever felt either sadness and despair or elation. And elation is adrenaline. Again, adrenaline is the hormone of excitement. Um, and uh, uh, and because of my dietary stress and abuse that I was putting on my body, and also my history of psychological trauma from my childhood, because trauma also increases your expression of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, because it makes you much more sensitive. You get conditioned as a child to become hyper aware of potential threats to your well-being. Your adrenaline and cortisol triggers are extremely sensitive, and they also have a greater, and those hormones also have a greater impact on your experience of physiology. This is actually the etiology behind phobias. When you have a phobia, what happens behind that is the release of adrenaline and cortisol in response to a stimuli, such as seeing a spider or getting on an airplane, is much, much, by many magnitudes higher, and also those hormones have a greater effect on your physiology than what happens with people that don't have phobias. Because the thing is like you get like a person who, like, say for instance, might like kind of be uncomfortable with spiders or flying. Um, it's the same stimulus. The difference is the degree of the release of the stress hormones in response to that, as well as their effect on the body. So a person with a phobia has a huge release of these stress hormones. So they have an uncontrollable, literally visceral reaction to things like that aren't always rational. And it's nothing to do with psychological conditioning. It's although that can influence it and be part of it, it has everything to do with the endocrine system and your hormones, because hormones are feelings. And so, yeah, and anyway, so progesterone is like empathy, and dopamine is happiness. Dopamine is happiness because happiness generally facilitates the successful behaviors of social creatures like human beings. We need to understand instinctually what brings success and what we want in life to continue to live. So, and a lot of people talk about dopamine disparagingly. There's another stream on here I did a while ago bashing what's called dopamine detox, which is basically just an idea perpetuated by self-hating people who have a problem with feeling happy and good, because everyone is conditioned to think that reward is negative, and association of dopamine with reward often leads people to associate reward with something that's negative and undisciplined. But you get reward behavioral feedback from lots of things in your life, from having a good meal to having like a nice conversation with somebody, getting a hug from a family member, making a new friend, doing your homework, doing a good job at work. Anytime you accomplish a goal, your brain releases dopamine because your biology wants you to understand what behaviors facilitate survival and success in life. It's not a degenerate negative temptation reward. It is part of our innate instinctual human survival. So if your conception of biology and the human experience is highly pessimistic and shameful, you don't understand these realities of life, so you continue to run up against challenges to achieving fulfillment in your life, because your understanding of how life is going is completely opposite of how it actually works. So so that's why vitality is such an important precursor to happiness, because it's very hard to feel happy if you're also always angry or upset or stressed out or sad. And because of hormones and the way that stress and nutritional stress and environmental stress and psychological stress affect the endocrine system. So, I mean, I've already been talking about this for 40 minutes, but the precursor to happiness is like everything else I've been talking about, like through all these other streams and stuff. Treating your body with kindness, feeding it well, and and stuff. And I talk about it in my book and in many streams that sunlight is actually a requirement for happiness and vitality. Without sunlight, our body has a really hard time making energy. A lack of sunlight automatically increases serotonin and melatonin synthesis. So, and remember, those are hormones of torpor. And this is exactly why people have seasonal depression, is because the absence of sunlight triggers metabolic pathways in our body that are hibernation hormone responses. As a human being, we don't hibernate. We actually have an anti-hibernation response. And guess what that is? Our response to high serotonin and melatonin, and specifically melatonin, is more adrenaline. Like, that's one of the reasons why when winter starts to come around and everyone gets really excited about upcoming, Thanksgiving and Christmas, the excitement is just a little bit extra adrenaline. That's being released. Excuse me, I need a drink of water. That's being released in response to the spike in melatonin that occurs because of that sunlight change. And that's what makes you feel excited. And adrenaline is excitement. So, then there's nothing wrong. I love it. I love that. I love the onset of winter and the approach of Christmas time. Like, it's such a fun feeling. These are all what make life. And so, and this is, this, I've been talking about endocrine system and stuff, but this is all part of what happiness really is. So I was actually watching a YouTube video earlier today from Nova on PBS about cats. And this researcher who was studying the human psychological the brain response to cats phrased these things that I'm talking about, these kinds of hormones, as a trick of nature. But the thing is it's not a trick at all. Like, this is the experience of living. Like, having hormones and having feelings and having experiences, that's the entire point of life. Even the bad stuff too, like, even like, like if we only ever felt happiness and good feelings, that's not being alive. You would never know what it's like to lose something or to be hurt, and how valuable things are, like relationships and people and freedom. The reason that we value those things is because the opposite also comes with unpleasant experiences. And happiness is not a state of eliminating all stress and challenges to life. It is learning to accept all of it together. If any of you are familiar with Philosophy Tube, which is one of my favorite channels, they do she does really deep dives into like philosophy and I'm not a philosopher. I actually think most philosophy is kind of bunk, which is really funny because I'm philosophizing right now. But she just released one that's about the Stoics. And people have pointed out that my work before, and I've never studied Stoics, but people have pointed out that there's a lot of similarities to it. But one of the key underlying purposes of Stoicism back in the day, and most people's motivations in life, is to try to avoid, eliminate, and control suffering. That's the entire point behind a lot of Stoicism, is this idea that if you remove attachments, then you don't get hurt. But the problem is that that's not actually possible in life. In life, like, you can't actually prevent pain and suffering. But the problem is that most of our entire focus and fixation at every waking moment of the day in our lives is to try to avoid pain and suffering. But since you can't actually do that, it never actually really pays off. And so you end up your entire life fixated on pain and suffering, and never seeing and experiencing the present and how good life really is. Like, I often tell people to understand, like, to try to recognize like how infrequent unpleasant experiences in our life actually are. There are some very heinous things that happen in life. A lot of unfairness and a lot of persecution and crime and really awful things that can happen. But the period of time between those events is often, by many orders of magnitude, less greater than when those things happen. Like and I'm saying this from somebody who grew up in a extremely abusive home and I was kicked out of my own family and have had lots of debilitating health stress. I almost died from cancer and suicide and alcoholism and and uh but all of those things, like there were long stretches in between unpleasant events, and if you do objectively it's very hard to understand this intuitively, but objectively recognize that, like, oh, like something bad happened to you like a month ago, and the rest of the time it's been fine. But part of the reason for that is that our survival is not threatened by good things like butterflies and hugs. They don't threaten our survival, so we haven't evolved as a species to fixate on them. You might have heard the kind of tired trope that, like, for every like one bad thing that you say to a child, you have to like say and do like 10 or something good things in order to make up for the negative impact of that. That's precisely this aspect of human evolutionary biology, is that we are oriented to fixate on and anticipate potential threats to our well-being, because those are what prevent or impair our ability to survive. And if you are raised in an environment where your parents were excessively afraid and fearful and taught you lots of control mechanisms and hyper awareness, then it's even worse. And like that was like a really big part of my experience, especially as a young man, when I was loosed into the world on my own without a lot of skills to successfully navigate life, was that I had been conditioned and trained by my parents through my experience growing up to be afraid of and anticipate negative experiences. So then my entire life was oriented toward that, even when things were nice and wonderful and calm. And the reason that this happens too is because our parents had that very same experience. When they were children, they were also taught by their own parents' behavior what you should be afraid of, why you should be afraid of it, and then how to try not to experience it. And very little of that is actually grounded in reality, nor is it fixated on things that are positive and happy and productive. And a lot of people, and then we often, and because we don't have skills to accept reality as it is, we often try to just ignore the things that make us uncomfortable and that are unpleasant, because we don't have the tools to actually handle and deal with them. And so your conditioning as a child from your parents' experience of their lives and their own conditioning is a major, 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 major underlying factor in happiness and satisfaction. I have so for instance, like I was coaching this person quite a while ago who suffered from very severe alcoholism. And was just getting drunk like every single day. And they started using my work to get better, and because my work is the cure for it, they did make quite significant progress. But for instance, like sodium acetate can completely remove cravings for alcohol, because the end product of alcohol metabolism in our body is acetic acid, actually. And acetic acid is one of the foundational nutritional elements for steroids, through several different pathways, actually. And so and in alcoholics and drug addicts, our gut microbiome is compromised and is not producing short chain fatty acids the way that it happens in healthy people. So we have craving, and because alcohol is so plentiful and cheap and readily metabolizes into acetic acid, our brain latches onto it as a source of acetic acid that can relieve a lot of our mental and physical suffering. But this person, even though they were using sodium acetate, would purposefully not use it at certain times so that they could drink. And but so this was one of my non-success stories. They were very, very, very adamant that life was terrible and that they should be miserable. And they had an extreme amount of unresolved childhood trauma, like I talk about. And for instance, this person was just adamant that their purpose in life was to make lots of money, and that they were worthless and would never be a success if they did not make lots of money. Um, and then the problem was that they did not make lots of money. They were also an alcoholic and very self-destructive. So, a person like that, it can happen, but those kinds of behaviors really reduce your odds of being able to earn money. So if your entire perception of yourself um, is based on something like money, and you don't have money, then then you're not going to have a good opinion of yourself or life, and you're going to be stressed out quite a bit. But the way that a lot of other people, a lot of advocates and proponents of mental health and happiness and well-being and all those kinds of things, the way that most people approach these kinds of problems is that is also your problem. It's your fault that you think that way, and you need to change your thinking in order to fix your life. And it's your fault, and it's your job to fix your life. But that's not actually how it works either, and that's why it's often not very productive or helpful, and why we continue to have pandemic levels of anxiety and depression, is because that's not actually how the human psyche works. The person that I'm talking about, the reason that they think that way and are oriented that way in life is because that's how they were conditioned to perceive life and their self-worth from the time that they were little children, because their parents as well were also told when they were children that they were only worthful if they achieved success and had monetary success and were physically sexy and people were sexually attracted to them. I mean, it's really, really sad. Like, most people come to my work or other health advocates because they want to be sexy just so people will like us. Like, think about it. Like, the only reason that you're here and listening to me usually is because you want to be skinny so that people like you. It's really sad. I mean, and I know that because that's how I used to view my life. Like, I used to think that if I got fat and old, that no one would like me. And I didn't want people to not like me. I wanted people in my life, and I wanted to have love and connections and relationships. And so I was desperate, and especially because I lacked them so much. I was desperate to belong and to feel included and to have love in my life. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be loved. This person that I tried to help, like, the reasons that they want people to be attracted to them and be in their lives, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it is every bit the human experience to want and desire love and affection and companionship and inclusion. And very often, though, that need is also used against us. Like, other people who are also exceptionally traumatized will use those kinds of vulnerabilities and others as control mechanisms. So, and a lot of you probably have this experience when, you want to be in a relationship with somebody, and all they do is, criticize you and yell at you or tell you what's wrong with you. When we do, or we do that to them as well. When we do that, or other people do that, we are exploiting our needs for personal gain and control, so that we can feel safe and secure in our lives. But you end up doing a lot of damage and compromising your relationships, and actually getting the opposite of what you want. If you are a lonely person with few friends, you're probably also very fearful, and you probably also have a very low opinion of yourself, and you probably don't know how to make friends or get the things in life that will bring you satisfaction. And the problem is because you don't, like, we don't know those things. Like, it took me 4 decades to learn how to get a lot of the things in my life that I had always wanted that I never knew. I often tell people that, like, once I got sober and I put my life back together and I started getting healthy again, I was excited to make more progress and, like, finally learn self-care skills and life skills and be the kind of man and person that I wanted to be. But I didn't have anyone in my life that I thought I could learn that from. Like, my sponsor in AA, for instance, was really insane. I liked him a lot and I loved him, but he was really mean and unkind and irresponsible, and he cheated on his boyfriend and stuff like that. And I looked at self-help books and celebrities and other people in my life that I knew, certainly not my parents. Nobody possessed the tools that I wanted to learn. I really just didn't know where I was going to get it from. And that's when I ended up developing the inventory therapy as it's presented in my books, is because doing that, like, I learned a version of it from Alcoholics Anonymous, and it actually gave me tools to teach myself those things. Like, I finally, one day I learned, because I was actually doing an inventory entry on this same exact problem, I realized that I had been teaching myself these skills that I wanted to learn for the last year or two that I had been doing it. All the research that I'd been doing, and the contemplation and meditation on stuff, and then the actual practice of sitting down and writing, like I talk about in my inventory therapy. I was actually teaching myself these skills that I had wanted, and it was a really great revelation. Also, because it was very empowering. In my entire life, I had been thinking that I needed other people to show me and teach me and expose me to things that I wanted, when in fact I actually could just do that myself. And that had never crossed my mind before, because that itself is also a skill. Like, that is also a tool. Being able to recognize our own power in our own lives is a tool. And like, the person that I was trying to help with alcohol, this really bad alcoholism, did not possess any of those tools. And in fact was extremely threatened by the idea that they had any power in their own life, because they felt so powerless and also had caused so much damage in their own lives, that the thought of bearing responsibility for hurting other people or being irresponsible gave them a significant amount of stress. So then they would not use sodium acetate so they could go get drunk. which is totally what alcoholic behavior is. You like the bit where you can, Melinda, you like the bit where you can use inventory to find answers yourself instead of looking for them on the outside. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. And this is a handicap with a lot of the systems that exist in our world still, religions and institutions, and even, like, educational systems and institutions. There's so much focus on authoritarianism, on authority figures, and the control and protection and safety that they can provide. I mean, that's like one of the the major underlying principle behind politics at all in the first place, is getting political leaders that will keep you safe. But safe from what? Other human beings? Yeah, other human beings can be really shitty, and they are dangerous. But they always have been. I mean, like, our practical experience is very often very different from what we are afraid of. And the constant fixation on fear is the primary impediment to happiness. I mean, how can you be happy, when all day long you're like, fantasizing about the IRS coming to possess your bank account, or someone stealing from you, or your partner leaving you, or how fat you're going to get, or that you are fat and that no one likes you. I mean, like, fear is the antithesis to happiness. And the problem is that fear is so ingrained into our ego system and ego structure, because of our conditioning as children, that many of us don't possess the skills and tools to extract ourselves from those situations in the first place. That, for instance, is why inventory therapy works so well, is because you communicate with the subconscious through the act of writing. That's why journaling actually is a very close approximation of inventory therapy, because by the writing practice, during writing, you actually communicate with your subconscious. You can't do this willfully. I have coached people before who I tried to teach inventory therapy to, and their attitude basically was like, oh no, I'm aware of it now, so it won't be a problem in the future. And then guess what? They get right back into those same ruts, because it is an unconscious. I mean, that's the entire point of the unconscious. Like, you cannot be conscious of it. It's impossible. That's why willpower very frequently does not work to solve our problems, is because the problem comes from our unconscious conditioning and the resultant perspective of life and ourselves that comes from it. And that's what motivates our conception of life and also our decisions. Like, you know, in life, really the only thing you can be, and this is also really important, like why, like when I mentioned that, like, it's important to recognize that emotions are hormones, because we don't actually have control over those. Like my work and work, like, you know, similar of many other people, that's very similar, is very attractive to a lot of people, because above all, we desire to control life, to avoid illness, to avoid disappointment. And guess what? That's not possible. I have made amazing strides in my life to change illness and my physical appearance and my psychological health. But at the end of the day, I don't have control over any of that. Like, that's the entire point of being immortal. Like, you know, I will eventually die, and there's nothing that I can do about that. And that idea often threatens people because we have been conditioned to view death as a punishment or a bad thing, and that it can be scary. And then what's on the other side is really scary too. And those fears are prime opportunities for exploitation too, by opportunistic people, by institutions that want to tell you about hell, you know, and sometimes those motivations come from a good place. They want to make the world better and help people be happy, but control never equals happiness. Control, because it is impossible to control, it always results in pain and heartache and loss and disappointment. Nowhere is that more certain than in personal relationships. The more that you try to control your loved ones, your partner, your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your children, your parents, the more that you try to control other people, the more unpleasant experiences you get and the greater risk of losing them. I mean, think about it. Like, you know, nobody wants to enter into a relationship with someone that then tells them that they're a miserable slob, and they're really disappointed in you. Every person wants the love of their life to think that they're just the best thing in the world. But you turn around and tell them that they're fat, or they don't take the trash out, or they're annoying, or, you know, irresponsible. Like, you're going to lose that person. Or if you're not going to lose them, you're going to lose their affection. There's a big difference between setting boundaries and setting healthy boundaries. Like, a healthy boundary is like not putting up with abuse. But when you tell people how disappointing they are, that's just a boundary that's going to prevent them from liking you and wanting to even have a relationship with you. And, you know, and then you get lost because of it. You know, in my past relationships, I was often a lot like that. I was so afraid of being rejected and not loved that I would try really hard to force my partners to demonstrate their commitment to me. Because that's how I had been trained to behave in relationships by my own parents, who themselves were also trained that way when they were children. Like, our parents are not abusive towards us because they're bad people. They just don't possess those skills either. People, like most people, are always trying their hardest and seeking happiness. It's just that we don't actually possess effective tools to achieve that. And very, very often these are behaviors of control that are actually antagonistic to our best interests. And so we end up chasing away people that we want in our lives through our very behavior. But then that also presupposes that you need other people to be happy, which is also actually not true. I mean, we don't. Loneliness is a thing, but it's also very different than being unhappy. You can be happy and lonely at the same time, actually. I tell people this often, like, because I'm gay, and mental illness is often a weapon used against gay people, has been for a very long time. I mean, being gay was considered a mental illness for quite a while, until it was delisted from the American Psychological Board, whatever that's called. Hang on, I've been holding my coffee in my hand for like an hour and 20 minutes now instead of drinking it. So now it's cold. Mental health was used as a weapon to try to control gay people. and transgender people for that matter too, and others too. Women. I mean, women like women probably have been the longest targets of mental health weaponry. Is that that's not the right way to say that? Control behaviors. Um, I mean, because I just like, have any of you ever heard the term histrionic? Right, histrionic means very angry and expressive and ridiculously like excessively emotional. Um, that comes from like the root the related root word also is with hysterectomy, like with when the uterus is removed. It basically just means like women being crazy. But the word has been in use for so long now that it's used to describe emotional outbursts in lots of people, both men and women. But the root comes from is misogynistic in nature. And men also, like, Philosophy Tube was talking last night about how even ancient Greek philosophers, Stoic philosophers, Roman philosophers, Stoics, were deeply misogynistic. They would say horrible things about women and say that women needed to only be in the home and not be philosophers and stuff like that. And men who like fly off the handle if you threaten their masculinity at all will say that women are emotional. I mean, it's the dumbest, most transparent, like, false dichotomy I've ever seen. Like, men and women are both emotional and histrionic. Like, men are awful too. Anyway, I forget why I brought that up. But anyway, so what are my notes here? Yeah, control behaviors. So like control behaviors which are based on fear always are the greatest impediment to happiness. That's it. That's all I needed to say this stream. I could have started this stream by just logging on and saying control behaviors are the antagonists of happiness. But it's understandable. And the antidote to control behaviors also, again, is not willpower. Willpower is control. That's why self-improvement is very often so hard to do and also unproductive. Somebody asked me the other day if, in my experience, there were any other sort of disciplines or strategies or behavior that I had used to achieve what I have, other than, like, say, inventory therapy, for instance. And I told them no. I mean, I've never done anything like I struggled for a long time, say, for instance, with like keeping my house clean, because I had a great deal of trauma from my childhood around cleanliness. My mom would come into our rooms and scream at us if there was like a shirt on the ground. And when we were cleaning, she would repeatedly inspect our work and point out what was wrong with it, and not just say like, "You're not done, keep going." She would like belittle us. She would like get mad at us and lecture us and tell us that we weren't good people for not cleaning. And I mean, it was extremely, extremely traumatizing. So when I became an adult and had to take care of myself and clean my own space, I found it impossible to do, because even looking at a mess would make me feel terrible about myself. So much so that it was debilitating. Remember, I say that hormones are emotions. When I would look at a mess, my brain would cause my adrenal glands to release lots of adrenaline, and my and stuff like that, and I'd have also rise in serotonin and melatonin, which are the hormones of shame and guilt, and those are debilitating. So, and a lot of people are like, oh well, you just have to come up with a plan, or you have to like use willpower and just be better, clean all strategies for this stuff. No, like, that's not how it works. You have to learn compassion for yourself. Control is the opposite of compassion. When you think that you have to make yourself do something, or you have to be better, that is the opposite of compassion. You're being hard on yourself, and that's the entire problem. That's where the trauma comes from in the first place, is that we don't know how to have compassion for ourselves and our mortal existence. No one person can be good at everything and get everything right. And we're not powerful in life. We have no power over things. Power, power and control are just an illusion. So if you think that you have to be rich or successful or sexy to control life, you're always going to be disappointed because it's just not possible. The only thing you can do is be who you are and try your best and show up for opportunity. That's what I always say. That's my quote. You can put it on a t-shirt. Your only job in life is to show up for opportunity and to do your best. And that is facilitated by compassion. The way that I learned to be able to clean up for myself all the time, because I would clean. I wasn't like a total slob, but the way that I was able to eventually do it where it was a normal, consistent behavior was to learn compassion for myself about how severe my trauma was over that stuff. That, yeah, of course I'm traumatized by that. Any kid would be, having been treated that way as a little child. And because our identity and our perception of ourselves forms when we are children, it's inescapable unless you learn tools of self-care like compassion and doing things like inventory practice in order to address that. Eventually I want to do like a YouTube series on and teach inventory therapy on a YouTube thing, but I'm not set up to do that yet. So yeah, but anyway, so control behaviors, and there's a lot of people's idea. A lot of people mistake satisfaction for happiness, and also think that satisfaction comes from having, pursuing money. Money can be taken away from you at any time. Relationships, those can be taken away too. It's sort of a sad but also special reality about relationships is that they all end eventually. Like, even if you find the love of your life and you're with them for a very long time, there will come a moment that one of you dies before the other. My granddad and Nana were, in love, and I think they were happy. My grandma died, I think like a year and a half or 2 years before my granddad died. The desire to avoid unhappiness is what prevents you from finding happiness. If you insist that you are a loser and that there's so much wrong with you and that no one will love you, that's a control mechanism meant to preempt disappointment and rejection. There's a lot of groups on the internet that are really fixated on romance and sex and control. And the thing is with dating, dating is nothing but a series of rejections. In dating, you will be rejected by every single person that you go out with until you find that one person that won't reject you. And the problem is not with the rejection. The problem is having a problem with rejection. Other people can even reject you for reasons that are positive. I often tell people that I coach about the time that I completely ghosted on the most gorgeous boy that I've ever dated. We met at a bar. He was 2 or 3 years younger than me. He was very tall like me. So handsome. I cannot tell you how beautiful this guy was. He was just jaw-droppingly stunning. And we went home together and we kept hooking up, and I immediately let it fizzle out because I was so terrified of falling in love with somebody like that. Because if I was in love with somebody that was that beautiful, it would kill me if they broke up with me. And part of my coping mechanisms and control mechanisms were to date people that I thought were less attractive than me because it made me feel safe. Because above all, I wanted to be loved, and I didn't feel that people would love me. And so I tried to mitigate that risk for myself. And in the process, ended up depriving myself of actually fulfilling relationships. That guy wasn't beautiful just because he was physically beautiful. He was also emotionally available. He would have probably been, who knows? He could have been awful. But my instincts And from what I knew about him, one of the reasons I was afraid of him was because he was so emotionally available and kind and talented and amazing and just physically devastating as well. So that's a prime example about how control behaviors are the opposite of happiness. Like trying to avoid unhappiness is exactly what keeps us from being happy. You're afraid of being poor, so you go work your ass off for a fucking loser that doesn't pay you enough money. So you never actually get to enjoy your life and be satisfied because you're so afraid of being poor, right? We think the entire point, like the person I was trying to help, the entire point of being rich is to avoid all of the consequences that come from not having money. But in the pursuit of that money, you end up sacrificing your humanity and your happiness and your morals, right? And you spend all of your time in materialistic concerns. So you don't actually get to experience your life. And this is why rich people often aren't happy, because we get told that money is going to solve a lot of the problems that we have, but it actually doesn't. So you get to be rich and you find out, oh, it actually doesn't fix any of those things. And so you still have those problems, and you also have a lot of liberty to be an asshole because you now have money. I mean, there are no happy rich people on the planet. I mean, there's probably like one or two, but generally they're not happy, and they're not happy because money doesn't solve those problems. I mean, but it doesn't matter how much that's demonstrated. People are so conditioned to pursue control behaviors because, like, having money is the desire for money is a control behavior. You're just you just want money so that you can feel safer in your life, which is understandable, but that's not actually how it works. I mean, all the money in the world doesn't prevent Elon Musk from being insulted. In fact, it actually increases the likelihood. So our desires to avoid unhappiness are exactly what cause unhappiness. And being able to let go of control behaviors and control mechanisms, including those that are like preemptive, that assume your absence of self-worth or that you're not attractive or special, those are control behaviors too. Sometimes people think in relationships that we are, I'm very self-sacrificing, right? Like I do so much for my partner. One time, one of my sisters told me that she was the person that loved me the most in the whole world after she had said some really horrible things to me. I'm like, the fact that you would even say that proves the opposite. Like you're just trying to control me, right? By telling someone something like that, what you're trying to do is engender obligation, emotional obligation, in order that you can feel more secure in that relationship. But people can leave us anytime they want for any reason. And you can be rejected in romance because falling in love with you makes them feel too insecure. But if you think that you're just unlovable and unattractive, that's what you will see from rejection. Even when it's not the case. And when it is the case, all that does is reinforce your trauma, and is not actually how life really works. So yeah. One of the other things too that's very effective in achieving happiness is the ability to make amends and correct past mistakes. And a lot of us do not have these skills. God knows I didn't really have it when I was younger. Very often, even when we do apologize, it's still a control behavior. We still try to make other people beholden to us. So we will hedge our apologies or include controlling, manipulative language in there. I'm really sorry, but that kind of stuff. Very often that is motivated by a desire to make someone else respect you, right? And to prioritize our needs. But the problem is that's also a control behavior, and we can't actually control other people's feelings, no matter how much we want to. And the desire to is literally just to make us feel safer. But in reality, by doing that, you also invalidate other people's needs, and you don't give them the opportunity to show you true love and affection and loyalty and stuff like that. You're trying to engineer it yourself. And doing that demonstrates to other people that you don't actually also value them. You just are trying to control them. So then they get mad back at you, and then you descend into acrimonious recrimination constantly. You do not need to justify yourself to other people. Like, you don't actually have to explain to other people or teach them how to treat you right. Doing so is a control behavior, and it is also still, it doesn't matter how legitimate the feelings and needs are. The actual behavior acting on those fears and control mechanisms always brings instability and tension and strife, and and because you don't recognize and accept your own humanity and have compassion for yourself, you're not actually able to extend it to another person. There's this really fun story I like telling to people, demonstrating this fact. Like, I was, back when I had a relationship with my parents, somewhat of a relationship with my parents, I was at their house and I was making cookies for one of my sister's birthday that I was going to mail them to her. And I'd been in their kitchen for like, cause they had this huge kitchen with marble countertops and stuff. And, I'd been in the kitchen making sugar cookies for probably like, an hour or so. And I cut them out and baked them, and they were cooling. And my mom came over and she said, "Hey, can I help you frost them?" And my mom is like the world champion of cookie frosting. Like, like growing up, like, she always made Christmas cookies. It was one of my most favorite experiences of being a child. Her Christmas cookies were impeccable, but most of the Christmas cookies would also get made for neighbors and relatives that we didn't even know and like. So that, because my parents, again, control behaviors. My parents, like, are kind of those people that care more about what strangers think about them than their own children. And they would do things like exhaust themselves in the kitchen baking banana bread and cookies for people that they never spoke to or had any relationships with, because they're so paranoid about what other people think about them, like many people are in the world. It's ridiculous. But anyway, my mom's like Christmas or cookie frosting decorating skills are just amazing. And she would like, and because of that, because they would make a whole bunch of them. And like, I like, we'd get like one or two, only be allowed one or two, but they'd all be in the freezer. So I would, I would sneak out at night and grab like a handful of cookies and eat some and keep them more in my room. I never got caught too, which was really funny. But, she came over to help frost, and I had bought these frosting packages that I'd never seen before, but they were like natural. They were like dyes made out of beets and flowers and stuff like that, and they were really pretty. And she opens the packages and just mixes it together, and it, for some reason, it doesn't work. Like, literally the food coloring is separate from the frosting; it doesn't mix. And she goes, "Oh, I think I messed it up." And I looked at it too, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's weird." And then I grabbed the package, and I looked at the back, and there were very specific instructions. It said to premix the dye with water before you mix it into the frosting. And I was like, "Oh, you had to do it this certain way." And my dad came over, and he hadn't helped with anything. He hadn't helped with the cooking, baking. He didn't offer to help with the frosting, and he came over and he just immediately started lecturing my mom. "Oh, why did you do that? That was so dumb." And then my mom got really flustered, understandably, right? And was like, you don't need to talk to me that way. And I was just trying to help him, blah, blah. And then they just started having an argument over this. It was just one of the dumbest arguments I've ever heard them have. And they've had many, many, many over the years, and that were very terrible too. And the problem in that situation, right, is, first of all, my mom did actually make a mistake, right? Like, she did actually mess up. But then my dad chose to use that experience as a way to hurt her and control her. So then she reacted to that as well, and then they ended up having an argument. In reality, if you have compassion for yourself and you understand that you don't need to justify yourself to other people, the reaction in a moment like that, when someone attacks us for an unjust reason, is, yeah, like, I messed up. I made a mistake. And it just ends there, right? But because when we try to control people and we have unresolved control mechanisms and trauma that inform these kinds of behaviors, we become susceptible to manipulation and and control behaviors of others. So in that moment, my dad wanted to get the upper hand on my mom in their relationship and be the more powerful person. So he chose to exploit a moment of vulnerability in order to get that. And then my mom gave that to him by actually also becoming controlling. You know, she rightly wanted to be treated with respect by the person that she's married to. And so then she began demanding it by justifying the moment and how she shouldn't be treated that way. But the problem is you do not need to justify yourself to other people. And if you find yourself doing that, that is a control mechanism as well that is seeking to prevent other people from controlling you. And remember, control mechanisms are the opposite of happiness. Control mechanisms are what get in the way of our happiness. So so in that moment, like by becoming a willing participant, or maybe unwilling if you consider the nature of the unconscious psyche, my mom became a willing participant in this control dynamic, and they both went away from the experience being miserable, right? But if you don't take yourself seriously, you go, yeah, that was dumb. I don't know why, I should have read the package. That didn't even take me like 15 seconds to say that. And then you just go back to making cookies with your son and having a nice day. The reflex to justify our experiences is rooted in trauma, and it is rooted in poor self-esteem and a lack of compassion for ourselves. Compassion for ourselves is being okay with the fact that we make mistakes, like not reading the directions on frosting packages. I mean, I'm such a klutz. Like, one of the things that I had to inventory a lot in order to resolve in my own traumatic experiences was whenever I did something dumb, like let's say I was walking through the house and not paying attention to where I walked, and I would stub my toe on a door and it hurt really bad. My immediate thought that went through my brain is, Nathan, you're so stupid. If you had just been paying attention, you wouldn't be hurting right now. Or, for instance, this happened the other day, although I've resolved it since, so I didn't have the same thought. But the other day, I was washing a pan in the sink and I accidentally dropped it and it broke one of my drinking glasses, and was really disappointing. And my brain's instinct, but this is more in the past, is, Nathan, you're so dumb. Like, if you just been paying attention, you would have avoided that. But that's just a conditioning from the way that I was raised as a child. Whenever we made mistakes, especially if we broke something or got hurt, instead of showing us compassion, my parents would get mad at us. That's what my dad would say. Nathan, you're so stupid. Pull your head out of your ass, kind of a thing, right? And that's how we learn these experiences. Like, that's where you learn that you have to justify your experience as a person and your needs as a person. No, Dad, like I was just trying my best and blah, 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 because that's a defense mechanism. We're trying to survive our parents. But the problem is that as an adult, that doesn't really serve our purposes. And if you're with somebody that treats you like that, you actually really shouldn't be with them anyway. You do not need to justify yourself as a person. Doing so is also a control behavior, even though it is justified. And all it does is also keeps us constrained to the kinds of volatile emotional dynamics that also get in the way of happiness and satisfaction in our lives. The irony about my relationship with the last person that I was in a relationship with is that if I had an adequate conception of my worth as a person and compassion for myself, I would never have gotten into a relationship with somebody like that. I knew from the very beginning that he was a disloyal, dishonest drug addict. But I, being also an alcoholic with very low self-esteem, I didn't have the self-care tools and skills to prevent that kind of an experience. But we then end up finding ourselves in situations like that, where we lack the tools also to extract ourselves from these kinds of behavior. But that's why the ability to apologize is actually so empowering, is because by being able to rectify our mistakes, we actually take power away from people that would exploit them. In that anecdote that I just told about my parents, my mom gave away her power to my dad and allowed him to dictate and control her emotions. But if she had just, shrugged it off and been like, yeah, I was dumb, what about it? That would have sucked all the power out of his manipulative, hurtful, harmful control behavior, right? So control gets in the way of happiness and satisfaction far more than you can even comprehend, because control behaviors are a unconscious function of the human ego. And by definition, you cannot be conscious of them. That's why so much self-help and willpower and stuff doesn't really work, is because you cannot consciously control the unconscious. You have to learn to resolve trauma by having compassion for yourself. That's how you actually like resolve trauma. That it's okay to be mortal, that we all have limitations in life, that we are never going to be the masters of biology or social dynamics or other people or money or things like that. And when you do that too, you end up learning to actually like yourself for who you are. So I have no social life. Like I have almost no relationships in my life, and that's not for a lack of trying either. Especially the last several years, I have tried to cultivate a great many relationships. But there's so much unresolved trauma and problems in the world that the pool of people to actually choose from are very, very limited. For instance, I tried to be friends with somebody when I still lived in Los Angeles, who had shown interest in having a friendship with me. But it turned out that they were in the middle of dating a abusive partner, and I didn't know any of that conflict. And they would often turn down invitations to hang out in preference for this person that was actually literally physically abusing them. Kind of a thing. The way that my life is right now is very much a consequence of not having the skills and abilities to make real friendships when I was younger. Growing up, like I did not know how to make friends, and the friends that I did choose were usually just sexually attracted to me, kind of a thing, which made me feel more in control. Remember, control is the opposite of happiness. So I would not develop or build real friendships because the ones I had were really just ones that made me feel comfortable and less vulnerable to rejection and abandonment. As a consequence of doing all this work, I ended up learning to like myself, like learning to enjoy my own company. It's very weird. Like, for the last several years, even though I don't have people to spend Christmas and holidays with, I have fun on the holidays by myself. Like at one birthday, I think it was last year, I made myself a cake, and it was really fun. And then I have relationships with people that don't live near me, so like I talk to people like online on through webcam and things like that a lot. But that I thought that happiness would be so elusive for me, being a gay, well, and from not having family and friends because of their conservative upbringing, to being as happy as I am, even though I don't have all the things that I thought would bring me happiness as a child or as a young person, is incredible to me. Every day that I wake up and I am excited for the first time in my life to be awake at all. Back when I was younger, I would wake up and I would wish so badly that could just stay asleep forever. Then that's why I tried to commit suicide. And even if I was having a nightmare, it was preferable to being awake. And for the last like 7 years of my life, like waking up every morning. I'm excited to start the day every day. And I didn't think that that actually could ever even be a possibility. And that also comes in spite of not having anything that most people think is a will bring happiness. One of my Mormon in-laws, who is a wealthy lawyer, um, uh, uh, talks badly about me to his family and my sister, and forbids her from having a relationship with me because I'm gay, and criticizes me for not having money, as if that is like a marker of happiness, when he is a miserable idiot whose wife doesn't even like him, you know, and abuses his children, and it's just a reaction to his own insecurity and desire to control other people and their perception of us, and things like that. And yeah, there's so many aspects of our lives that we handle through control behaviors, and especially ones that you aren't even conscious of because they're part of the subconscious construction of the human psyche, which is why it's so hard to tease apart. But when you learn how to have compassion for yourself, um, and that comes from accepting reality the way that it is, not in spite of reality, but because of it. Like the Stoics were trying to accept reality in spite of reality, not actually including it, even though that's what they profess to do. But you know, the whole misogyny thing is an outright refutation of that principle. Um, you can't treat other people that way and find enlightenment. It's just not possible. Um, and the human psyche is really, really difficult. Well, but it's not though. I mean, I don't know why I said that. Like, it really isn't. Like, the process that I went through of like fixing my life and doing inventory therapy was so much easier than anything that I had been doing before. I mean, I did it in like 2 weeks. I mean, and that's a lie, because because like the real work, like when you do like practices like inventory therapy, um, the real progress comes from the effects of doing the inventory. So like you do the inventory or practices that help you to let go of your control mechanisms, then you have different experiences from the same stimuli. You behave differently in your life. You treat people differently. You make different decisions. And that produces different results, and those results become more effective, and then that engenders confidence. I've said many times in my streams that confidence is not an adopted attitude. When you adopt confidence willingly, that's arrogance, not confidence. Confidence comes from experience. When I get online to do a stream, I know that like, half a dozen people are going to show up here to talk to me, right? Instead of zero. That I have confidence that half a dozen people are going to show up on here. And then over several days, a few hundred will see this work. That's confidence. Like, I know that that will happen because I've had many experiences in the past that reinforce that reality. If I were to have never streamed and get on and think that like, oh, several hundred people are just going to show up for no reason, that's arrogance. That's what you do every day when you try to pretend to be confident. It's actually arrogance. And arrogance is a control behavior. You feel badly about yourself, so you try to adopt confidence, but that's actually arrogance, because arrogance admits our weaknesses and shortcomings, doesn't deny them. And so then you get a negative experience. You get people that treat you badly because you're an arrogant prick. That's a control mechanism. You are trying to control how people perceive you and think of you. Control is exactly the opposite of happiness. Happiness comes from being able to recognize life the way that it is, which includes your positive aspects, not just your negative ones. Most people who are really self-pitying really have no conception of their positive attributes. When I was a young man, I was very tall and very good looking and very talented and very smart. There was no reason for me to be insecure about relationships and other people. I mean, absolutely none. But I was all the time. And that was because I had been conditioned by my parents to hate myself, and that's because they hated themselves. They were also conditioned by their parents to do the same. Um, uh, uh, And that's why too, when you're like, when you're trying to build relationships and build a family or have romantic experience, even just going to go wanting to go fuck somebody, um there's so much deliberation that comes behind that for people who with unresolved trauma, that it becomes nothing but an exercise in control behaviors. From everything that you obsess over, should I text them right away? Should I wait to text them? What should I say when I'm with them? Should I censor myself? Should I not censor myself? Should I really want to have sex? I don't want them to know that I want to have sex. I have to pretend that I want a relationship or that I'm into them when I really just want to fuck their brains out. Like it's all control mechanisms. So you don't actually get to spend any of the experience actually feeling fulfilled, because every single moment of it is nothing but control. To control our unpleasant experiences, our unpleasant emotions. And you can't actually control those things anyway in the first place, so there's really no point in doing it. Like, dating and relationships are nothing but a series of rejections until you do find somebody. And even when you do find somebody, they can still reject you or they can die. Loss is a guaranteed experience in life. There's nothing you can do to prevent it. And trying to only actually accelerates the risk of loss. Yeah, and so anyway, so the last thing too in terms of happiness, like, a lot of it is really also what spirituality really is. There's so much control and prejudice and bias in institutions like religion because they seek to find happiness through control. If you can control other people, you can make them behave and be a certain way, then you can prevent bad things from happening, thus you'll be happy. But, you fucking look at people like the insane fucking crazy lady that killed her children because she was part of a religious cult. That's, I don't know how that was supposed to bring her happiness. That's fucking insane, right? But we still do that though, even if we think that, our religion is good or not bad or whatever. There's still so many control mechanisms in there that are ostensibly there to help people find happiness, but they don't, because happiness is never found in control, ever. The subversion of fear is found in control, but not happiness. You can make people do what you want, and you can insult them and harass them and belittle them, or you can, pray and read scripture and meditate and because that was the thing, when I learned meditation, I thought, oh, this is going to be really great because it's not associated with a religion, but it's still a spiritual practice and it will help me fix my problems. Well, the reason I wanted to fix my problems was because I wasn't happy and I wanted to control my problems. And so I learned meditation as a way to control the way that I felt. But the problem is that I couldn't actually do that, really. You can influence certain things, right? Like by eating healthy and balancing your endocrine system. But the reason I was empowered to do that was because I stopped trying to control things and I looked for actual answers. A lot of science tries to just control things too. That's why there's a lot of bias and prejudice and bad science out there. Is because a lot of science, same thing. A lot of science, the purpose of, do you know that most studies that are done in the scientific world, like a huge majority of them, are just done to promote the livestock industry. Like the entire point of most science that has been done is just to make animals bigger, fatter, and tastier. And so a lot of the scientific information we have about biology is for the animal industry, the food industry, to make money, to make profit. But like institutions like religions, a lot of people use them as a tool to try to achieve happiness, but they don't exist to give you happiness. Institutions like religion exist to control people. Because remember, people have trauma, people fear, people want to control life in order to avoid loss and disappointment. I mean, I grew up Mormon, and there really is no greater demonstration of this psychotic, pathological control desires than Mormonism. Mormonism presents all of these really fantastic promises of living forever and being rich after you die and being a god, and I mean it's really fantastical. It preys on every single human being's desire to avoid death and illness and loss. I mean, the biggest irony in Mormonism is that they claim to prioritize family, and they claim that families can be together forever after you die. But my family kicked me out of the family when I was fucking 18 years old, right? They have no relationship with me because not because I'm like mean or like I was kind of bratty when I mean I'm still kind of bratty. But like you know, I wasn't like a thief. In fact, two of my siblings stole from me. I've never stolen from any of them. Um in fact, I would give them money and presents all the time. I thought I could buy their love. Um and even helping them, even after I started like getting really good at biology and physical health, like I thought that like helping them with their health problems would like engender their affection, and it didn't. All they did was take advantage of me and treat me even worse. I mean, literally, like I have literally like my family are some of the least supportive people of my work that I've ever met. My own family, in spite of my long history of helping them and successfully helping them too with things. Um, and yet they come from a religion that supposedly prioritizes family, but they don't. They use family as a way to control people to make them behave the way that they want because people think control behaviors will make them happy, but they don't. So no one in my family is happy. Several years ago, well, one of my sisters kind of is now, but she's the one that's also married to the control freak loser who like, won't let her have a relationship with me. She several years ago approached me and asked me for help because, as she put it, she didn't understand how I could be happy when I'm single, gay, and poor, and atheist. While she was rich and Mormon and married and had children and was so miserable. She recognized the dichotomy between what she preaches and what she reaps and what I reap. And so then she asked me for help. And then I ended up teaching her inventory therapy and helping her to resolve a lot of her own trauma from our childhood. But this same process makes space for spirituality. And like I just said, I'm an atheist, but atheist means you don't believe in religion. I still believe in spirituality. Spirituality is apparent to life. We have spiritual experiences. You have moments where you connect to feelings and things that are greater than any one of us individually. And spirituality is an inherent need in human life as well, and participates directly in happiness. Actually, as I bring up Philosophy Tube again, on Philosophy Tube, on the Stoic episode, she talked about the Stoics believing in a universal energy. I forget the word, what they called it, Logos or something like that. But then brought up the point, we know that that's not true because of science. But in actuality, no, it is true. Actually, energy that we are made of can never be destroyed. It can only change forms. Energy is a constant law of nature. That's what we're made out of. That's what we're alive. Electricity is not just electricity. It is electromagnetic energy that exists in all forms of life and energy in the entire universe, from its production in stars and light to the transfer of energy when it strikes objects and produces thermal radiation. That is the same thing that Stoics are talking about when they were referring to Logos. I think that's what it's called. I don't remember exactly. It is impossible to experience real spirituality when you're burdened with excessive control behaviors, self-hatred, and stress. That's why meditation and praying and journaling can facilitate spiritual experiences, is because they help quiet the mind and thus the endocrine system, and promote connecting to whatever spirituality really is. which can be done through a purpose practice when you resolve trauma and take care of yourself, and like the way that I promote, I promote in my books and stuff like that. Spirituality is a real thing, and it is also a real need, but it gets exploited by institutions like religion for the purposes of control by people who are exceptionally fearful of life. One of the most eye-opening and strange experiences I had in my life as a young person was moving to Los Angeles and seeing that the people in Los Angeles were actually more kind than all the people in Utah where I had grown up. Because I had been taught that people that were not Mormon were evil. And that's not hyperbole. Mormonism as a religion teaches that people who are not Mormon are part of the great and terrible church and are apostate and evil. Like literally they use that language, like evil, not just like misguided. They literally say evil. And so when I was raised in this psychotic cult of a religion, I thought I was scared of the rest of the world and scared of other people. But the first day that I was in Los Angeles, when I was pulling out of this neighborhood and there was so much traffic, the person immediately in the lane that I was waiting for stopped to let me in. And I was shocked because I would never driven in a big city. I was terrified. I thought everyone was going to be honking at me and screaming at me and cutting me off of the road. And the very first person that I came into contact with my car during the daytime immediately let me into this traffic jam so that I could get into the traffic. And from that day forward, most days in Los Angeles, every single person that I interacted with or had an experience with were almost always very kind and wonderful. And it's because when you live in a big city, you're forced to be better behaved, because otherwise there's a lot of people who will who will give you consequences if you don't. It's not altruistic, but it is a reality. I was so surprised because I was so terrified of the outside world, and that was a direct result, a consequence of being a member in a religion whose sole purpose is nothing but control. And happiness and control cannot coexist. A little while ago, I posted a inflammatory accusation on Instagram about Mormons sending missionaries out to tell Black and brown people that their skin is a curse from God, and pointing out that is racist, because it is racist, and that is a belief of theirs. Actually, it says so in their scriptures. They believe that Native Americans were cursed by God. Their skin color is a curse from God because of the wickedness of their ancestors. It's fucking racist as all fuck, and to send people out to spread that kind of a message is a racist act. And a bunch of my Mormon relatives really took issue with that and really attacked me, and tried to explain away how racism, how it's not racist because it's the will of God. It's really fucking insane. But anyway, but none of my Mormon relatives are happy. They're all constantly afraid of damnation and not making it to heaven, and the disapproval of their family members and their community. I don't know how you can think that that's a state of happiness when you're constantly afraid that the very people you associate will abandon you if you become a harlot. There was the lady that I got piano lessons from. I remember when I was a kid, the entire neighborhood talked bad about her because she wasn't married to the guy that she was dating, and they lived together. And she was amazing. Oh my God, she was amazing. She was such a cool person. I loved being at her house. She made me feel so accepted and loved, and she was really good at piano. She was very pretty too. Yeah. So anyway, so one of the results of being able to do this kind of work, where and I know this stream is obviously very unspecific. Like there's no way I can like just teach inventory here on a stream. I need to have it constructed and edited and make an actual like presentation of how to do it. But you know, obviously it's in my work and in my book and things like that. And the one of the greatest benefits of being able to go on this journey and achieve what I have is a deeper understanding of my place in the universe and why I exist as a person. And it's really wonderful. And the daily experiences that I have of peace and satisfaction and fulfillment through from simple things, um in spite of what happens and regardless of what I have as a person, is that's happiness, right? You know, being like being thrilled by like cooking myself breakfast and the sun's out or it's raining and it's beautiful outside, and having that be enough. Not needing approval or money or status or relationships or a six pack to be happy. Like that's what happiness is, you know? I don't need any of those things. Um and I never thought that I could have that. And and that's so everyone can have that. And like Millen mentioned earlier, like the inventory, the empowerment that comes from learning those tools to care for yourself and your needs, um, in ways that are actually effective rather than trying to control life, is what facilitates what you're looking for. That's not found in things like money and sex and sexiness and I mean, sex is happy, and like sex itself can bring happiness, like intimate connection with other people. I mean, so I meant like being skinny. You do not need to be skinny to be happy or have people like you. And yeah, like I was coaching someone, and we're getting kind of long here, and I'm wrapping up what I'm saying. But if you guys want to ask questions, go ahead and start, and we can talk about whatever you want to. When in streams, I always let chat talk back and discuss whatever's on your mind or whatever you're having problems with. So go ahead and start asking, and when that ends, when that's done, we'll end stream. But I was coaching a woman a while ago who was having trouble with weight, and I wasn't able to help her. Um, and one of her big motivations for doing it was that her husband told her that he was no longer attracted to her, and that's heartbreaking and really sad. When you love somebody and then they tell you that you're fat, it's, you know, it's they're saying that they don't like you and you like them, and all you want is for them to think you're the best thing in the world, right? um but unfortunately there are people who are also extremely traumatized and they don't know how to love others for who they are. um I love fat guys as much as I like muscly and skinny guys. Like, big dudes are so sexy. I mean, Jesus Christ. Um, and I'm really attracted to the experience of connecting intimately with a person, not necessarily. I mean, obviously, I want somebody who looks really sexy, but I think sexy is a lot of different forms, and I'm very very attracted to people's personalities if I am attracted to them. And that's a lot because I have compassion for myself as well, like my own experience. I'm not, when I go into intimate encounters or conquests, I don't look for them to satisfy some insecurity in me. I look to literally just connect with another person and have that experience. And people who reject their partners because their physical appearance changes have deeply seated trauma over mortality and illness and acceptance and rejection based on the physical form. So they will highly emphasize physical um, appearance because of that insecurity. So then you end up missing out on truly intimate, fulfilling encounters with other people, even if you've been with them for decades, especially if you've been with them for decades, because of your own unresolved trauma and experiences that prevent you from actually achieving happiness in the first place. Because that, again, is just another control behavior. Being upset with somebody, being unattracted to them after you've been with somebody because they got fat, is just your own fears of getting fat and being rejected, and you're actively doing that to somebody else. And because control mechanisms are the exact opposite of happiness, you don't get happiness. Yeah. Sorry, Melind, you said they're not getting tastier, but I didn't see that, and I don't know what you meant. You were so jealous because of my ability to derive happiness from simple tasks, but now you're learning to. Yeah, you are. You've been doing so much hard work. I'm really proud of you. It's really not that hard. It's hard initially because I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the stream, not 2 hours in, but it was part of doing this work. The reason that it can be really hard is because the purpose of the ego, exactly opposite to what most people think it is to promote our survival. The ego, the existence of the ego is not a flaw in humanity. It's part of the design. The ego is what is the structure in the psyche that makes us aware of potential threats to our well-being. When you view someone as an adversary, for instance, this is always very perplexing to me. I am no one's enemy at all. Like I literally, my entire work is focused on trying to help people be healthy and satisfied and fix their health problems and stuff. But people will, depending on their certain prejudices or viewpoints, will immediately treat me like I'm an adversary, whether because I'm gay or because I'm outspoken or because I'm smart or for a myriad of reasons that triggered their insecurities. They will immediately finger me as an adversary, even though I am actively trying to help them. That's a function of the ego. Part of our evolutionary ability to survive involve conflict with other human beings. In fact, human beings are the strongest stimulant of the fight or flight reflex and the release of stress chemicals. So if your perception of other human beings is that they are all potentially a threat to your well-being, you're constantly having that reflex triggered, which then releases stress hormones, which then make you feel really upset and unmoored and vulnerable. And then you lash out at that and treat other people like they're the adversary that you perceive them to be. So it can be very difficult to overcome the ego's resistance to letting go of those control mechanisms, because the ego believes that those control mechanisms are what also spare us from failure and loss and danger. But very often what informs the ego are actually traumatic experiences as a child, and also adopting your parents' traumatic experiences and their perception of adversity in life. And so your ego is often usually misinformed to what threats are actually a threat. So it can be very difficult to overcome the ego's resistance to introspective therapy, like inventory therapy and letting go of control mechanisms, because literally our brain is hardwired to believe that those are the things that keep us safe. Like if you've ever found yourself in a relationship, like wondering why you're self-destructive, like why do you always nag on somebody, or why do you always think the worst of someone, especially children, like parents just by default will very often anticipate their children doing the worst so that they can prevent that and help them be better. But that's exactly the kind of dynamic that engenders childhood abuse. When you're doing that, you're actually not preemptively precluding antisocial or ineffective or harmful behavior in your children. You're actually conditioning your children to be that. You are telling your children that they're bad, or that they are likely to be bad or do bad things. And that actually increases the propensity for that kind of behavior. And the reason it does that, and not the opposite like you want, is because the effect of parenting on the human psyche is not your conscious behavior. It's the unconscious behavior on which children pick up on, and that informs their perception of themselves and life. And so by telling a child that they're awful, and just anticipating, I mean, all the parents that I've ever worked with, a lot of their, like one of the ultimate goals every day of parenting is just to prevent meltdowns. So like here's like an example, like kids are more likely to have a meltdown if they don't eat, right? So a parent will, moms especially, will try to prepare enough food and sit their children down to eat regularly so that blood sugar doesn't drop, so that their children don't fall apart and cause a scene and make them upset. But very often that behavior is like, then the child like maybe doesn't want to eat. So then the mom or dad start laying into the child, you've got to eat, you have to eat, you can't get up from the table if you eat. And by your very behavior, you end up instructing the child to become hysterical, there's that word again, and fall apart and cry, because you're literally stressing them out about eating because you're afraid that they're going to fall apart and stress you out. But they're already stressing you out because of your perception of life and other people and in your role and effectiveness as a parent. But as a parent, your job is actually not to prevent meltdowns. It isn't. Your job as a parent is to be a guide and guardian for your children and to demonstrate to them how to behave when you have the feelings that normally underlie a meltdown. But you're doing exactly the opposite by having your own meltdown over the fact that your children won't eat when they're supposed to. And thereby you engender the very problem that you're trying to avoid. And then the children learn that lesson from you, that people should be controlled and be made to do what you think that they're supposed to do, instead of protecting them and teaching them and empowering them to take care of themselves. An opposite effect of that would be like, if a child is old enough and they're hungry, you can inform them that they can get food for themselves. Like, go in the fridge and get an apple. Kid, that doesn't immediately strike children as an option. There's a point where they learn that, because up to that point, you've been doing nothing but taking care of them. I make this analogy in my book, The Perfect Child, when in my youth, I was probably 7 or 8. And I loved having my mom draw for me. She was such a good artist, and she could draw horses and mermaids like I wanted. And she was so good at it. And I went up to her one day while she was on the couch nursing my newest sibling. And I asked her to draw me a picture of a horse. And she said, "Nathan, I'm busy. I can't draw you a horse." I said, "But Mom, I want a horse." And she said, "Nathan, I am busy. Go draw one yourself." And I said, "I can't." And she said, "Yes, you can. Just think about it. Like, think in your head what a horse looks like and go draw it yourself." And that was the precise moment that I became an artist in my life. I actually became really good at drawing. I mean, this screen you're looking at, I made this. I'm a decent artist. And I can do that stuff. And I became a cartoonist as a kid, and I drew comic book art, and then I became a graphic artist as a professional as an adult. And but like, that was a moment in which my mom was forced by circumstances to empower me to do something on my own. Otherwise, if she hadn't had her hands full with 5 other children at the moment, she would have drawn that horse for me. But in that moment, she taught me that I could do that. So, like, your job as a parent is not to make your children do what you think they should do. Your job is to protect them and empower them with life skills so that they can avoid problems in life. And you don't do that when you are trying to control them, because trying to control them is literally fulfilling your own selfish sense of fear and insecurity, and not providing for them necessarily. But anyway, so that's why the ego gets in the way of practices and your ability to find happiness, because its entire purpose is to try to control things that we're afraid of. And letting go of that control is very, very frightening to a lot of people. So you experience a great deal of resistance to doing this kind of work. And that's why it's so hard to find happiness, because you have to give up control in order to find happiness. And people who think they're clever might say, "Oh, but you go to work to earn money." That's not necessarily control. Like, control is like the idea that you think that your job in a job interview is to make someone give you a job. That's not. Excuse me. Whoa. That was my first cough after 2 hours of talking. My research on cystic fibrosis has been going so well. I'm very excited about it. But a lot of us, like, I thought this for a long time too. I thought it was my job to make people hire me. So when I would go out for job interviews, I'd be very anxious and stressed out. I'd do everything that I could, dress really nicely and get my resume really good. The desire for these kinds of control is what makes people lie. You know, people that lie on their work resume or things, you know, to get what you think that you're supposed to make other people give you. And then it ends up becoming a problem. Like if you lie on your work resume and then you get the job, you have to keep up that lie for the entire fucking rest of the time that you're at that job. And it's gonna come out eventually. You know, that's exactly the opposite of control, actually. You're actually imperiling your well-being at that point because of your desire to control. So then you get a lot more unpleasant experiences and ostensibly, you know, are not happy because of the consequences of your behavior. When you go to something like a job interview, you are not actually in charge of making people give you a job at all. Your only job when you go to a job interview is to show up for opportunity and to do your best. That's it. You are not actually responsible for making people love you or give you or hire you or you know, all those things. And you don't need to either. You know, if you just show up for opportunity and do your best, life works out often a lot better than when you do try to control things. But anyway, so getting over the ego and its instinctual motivation, because it's part of our biology. It's not just like some arbitrary made up thing that our brain does. It's literally part of our biology. A lot of people talk about psychology as if it's separate from biology. It absolutely is not. They are one and the same. And so it can be very, very difficult to get past the barriers for learning how to get rid of control behaviors because it is built into our biology. Hi, Word. That would be a good shirt, t-shirt. Yeah, maybe I should make t-shirts after I get my book finished. But yeah, that's also why, like, when you find yourself in patterns of behavior, like in relationships that you know aren't good for you, but you keep doing it, that's because the ego is built into our biology. It's not something that's easily changed, and certainly not also through other control behaviors. When you sit down to do inventory, that is a compassionate act of self-care. It's not control. You're literally teaching yourself to let go of control by doing that. And that's also why it can be really hard to do sometimes. And that's why happiness is so elusive for people, is because human nature as an animal, as a mortal creature on this planet that's frankly not very smart at all. I am not one of those people that think that we are smart as a species. Has a very hard time finding happiness, is because control behaviors are built into our very biology, and they have to be understood and learn compassion for yourself, which is not easy to do, considering that none of the people who raise us or lead our society know what that is or have it for themselves. You know, the reason that my parents caused me so much trauma as a child was not because they were bad people, but because they don't have compassion for themselves. So they weren't able to extend it to me, or you can't share what you don't have. So they weren't able to do that for me. But like me, you can do that for yourself. You can teach yourself to have compassion for yourself by just practicing self-compassion. Be kinder to yourself when you have insecurity. You know, it's okay to feel bad if you feel bad for being fat, right? Or tired or sick or old or disenfranchised. You know, if you feel insecure about those kinds of things, that's just a result of your own childhood trauma, and it's okay to feel that way. You don't have to necessarily try to control to change it. Although learning to have compassion for yourself will change that. It's the actions that we take outwardly on those control behaviors that are usually the problem, that are what also get in the way of happiness. I'll give a financial anecdote here too. So like especially because I grew up in Mormonism, which teaches that Mormons are existentially exempt from law and rules that are not the church. Um, there's a lot of like tax dodgers in the Mormon church, and like people that have a really hard time with authority and taxes. And I had very similar fears and problems when I was a young man, especially because my parents didn't ever teach me financial management or taxes, and then I didn't learn that kind of stuff through any other sources either. Certainly not through school. And I found paying tax, especially because I worked as a freelance artist, and was taxed higher than people at normal jobs. I found taxes and the IRS and the government an enormous source of anxiety as a young man. And like in 2008 too, I actually had working as a successful motion graphics artist. I actually had a lot of job. I actually made a bit of money that year, and I didn't pay taxes on any of it because even thinking about having to pay taxes and what to do about it gave me so much anxiety. It was debilitating. And I was not able to even like do something like open up a damn website and learn how to pay taxes, or go to like, a tax prep service or an accountant or anything. So, and I kept, and then my brain kept justifying it by thinking like, oh, I'll do it eventually. I'll get around to it. And then of course I just never did get around to it. Because I was so afraid of the IRS and taxes and things like that. And then and then the IRS has a really long arm. You cannot pay taxes 1 year and they'll come at you 5 or 6 years later for it. And so eventually I got a tax collection on it, and by that time too, the 2008-2009 recession had wiped out my business, so I didn't have money to pay those taxes that I owed for that year. And then that brought me an immense amount of anxiety and stress. And because I was still drinking heavily a lot, and that was another thing too. When you're an active alcoholic, your brain just really does not work properly. You're not able to really comprehend responsibility and obligation and consequences and those kinds of things, and you just drink all the time to turn all of those things off. And I then ended up settling with the IRS, but then I was really stressed out about the settlement. And but the thing is, the settlement was really generous. I think I owed something like 10 grand in taxes, and they settled with me for like 3, right? And that's not a lot of money, but when you're a struggling alcoholic, and not even making enough money either in the first place, like that was really, really stressful too. Then fast forward several years, then my life fell apart, and then I got sober, and then I started making plenty of money. Actually, I got a really great job and was getting paid very well, and I took care of all my financial obligations. But it wasn't because I had money, although that made it easier. I did a lot of this work that I'm talking about around my fear of institutions like IRS and paying taxes and things like that, because avoiding all those things and the trouble I got myself into were the result of control mechanisms. Like I was trying to avoid, because I feared money, and I feared insolvency and being poor. So part of that, dealing with that fear, was to try to hold on to as much money as I possibly could, which meant ignoring the IRS and not paying taxes. But then the IRS came at me anyway, and then I owed even more money, and it was just such a headache. I mean, some of you listening might be feeling anxiety over the same thing just from hearing me talk about it. But I ended up, and then even in more recent years later, I still started having anxiety when tax season came around, and found myself putting it off. And those are control mechanisms. Like ignoring responsibility and ignoring problems is a control mechanism. It helps protect our mind from the stress of those kinds of obligations and intrusion into our lives, and inconveniences and loss, and fear of financial insecurity. And but then I ended up doing enough inventory on it that I realized that it doesn't fucking matter. Like it's just money. Money is fake. It's completely made up, right? And having to pay some money to the IRS really didn't affect my material life at all, actually. Like like the idea that even did was also a result of trauma that I had as a child surrounding money, surrounding my parents' financial abuse and like, one of the things that my dad would always tell me as a child was how expensive I was to raise, right? I mean, that's such a loving thing to tell to a child, is what a burden they are to you, right? But also the net effect of that and the financial ups and downs that my parents had growing up, and their behavior toward money, conditioned me to view money as a source of anxiety. But it's actually not. That is just I mean, money does provide real access, to things like food and healthcare and shelter. But beyond that, the way that we treat money and the reason that it gives us so much anxiety isn't because of its real consequential nature. It's because of the psychological trauma that we've had surrounding money and our self-worth and our ability to survive in life. And those ego structures that fuel that are very powerful, and it often compels us to behave in ways that are actually antithetical to our well-being and desire and ability to find happiness. I mean, you can't, like, if your idea of happiness means retaining every single dollar that you make and never having anyone take it from you and stealing from you or paying the IRS, then you're never going to be happy, because that's never going to happen, right? Death and taxes. But also, other people steal, and you lose things. My ex took all of our money when we split up, and I didn't have anything. But I missed him, and I was really sad about it, but I wasn't the miserable one. He was the one out doing cocaine and destroying his life and giving up a relationship with somebody that's actually pretty incredible, right? I was out there having amazing spiritual experiences and putting my life back together and learning things about life and reality that I never knew were even possible. And they were happening to me. And it wasn't because I became more disciplined. It was because I learned how to actually start having compassion for myself, to get rid of control behaviors. And then that naturally led to finding happiness and getting the things in life that I always really wanted. Yeah. So yeah, anyway, that's all about happiness. Do you guys have anything else you want to talk about? If not, I'm going to wrap it up. If you are listening to the VOD, you can get my books or subscribe to my other social media links in the description below the video. Books really help me. Well, books help me earn a living. And you can also support the channel at Patreon. There's a link down there too for Patreon. And if you have bought my book, or if you are going to buy it, an update is forthcoming in the near immediate future in a few weeks. A really major update. Some of the stuff is in the current version that's on the site, or if you bought it recently, but not everything that's going to be in the update. And so keep an eye out for that. And anybody that buys a book gets a free link to the update afterwards. It's not like you have to pay more for the update. You get it just from having the book in the first place. Jay, is there info on ADHD in either of my books? Yes, there is actually. ADHD is actually specifically procrastinating. Oh, yes. That's actually a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. ADHD does very much help promote procrastination, and I will tell you why. Okay, so ADHD is discussed in my chapter alongside with depression, PTSD, and anxiety, and bipolar disorder, and it's because they are all related. So in depression and PTSD and bipolar disorder, there are major swings and fluctuations in stress hormones and dopamine. Mostly stress hormones, though. Very, very low dopamine usually. Adrenaline, one of our most consequential stress hormone, is made from dopamine, and then in turn, dopamine is made from tyrosine and phenylalanine, and tyrosine, which can be made from phenylalanine, also. And in conditions like depression, PTSD, and bipolar disorder, you have very high expressions of adrenaline, which then depletes you of dopamine. And depending on the various severities and fluctuations, you either get depression or PTSD or bipolar disorder, which also then involve other hormones too. Like PTSD, both PTSD and depression involve large fluctuations also in the torporific hormones. Bipolar disorder would too, but not quite as much. And ADHD is like a mild version of depression and bipolar disorder. And it is caused by high circulating levels of stress hormones. And the reason that the symptom of ADHD, which is the impairment of attention, is because one of the biological functions of stress hormones is to motivate action. So, for instance, let's say that you are a evolutionary human being sitting on the shore of a lake one day and you start to get hungry, and your body releases adrenaline to release sugar from glycogen storage so that blood sugar is continually circulating in your bloodstream so that your cells can sustain themselves. You get hungry, the instinct behind that is to go get some food. That is literally what stress hormones do. Stress hormones literally motivate action. So if you are constantly expressing higher levels of adrenaline and stress hormones, other stress hormones, no matter how high they are expressed, those will motivate action. But since like sitting at a desk and paying attention is the opposite of doing things, it's literally just sitting. If you have ADHD, you find that impossible because the slight elevation in adrenaline that is being and other stress hormones that are being stimulated during the condition literally prevents your brain from doing that. So you get distracted by every other thing that can bring your attention. Oh, that's shiny, or oh, I like, I have this other thing that I need to do. That's literally the action of stress hormones like adrenaline acting on the brain. And yeah, and so the chapter on depression and PTSD and bipolar disorder talks about ADHD as well. And basically, it's really easy though. Like literally, the causes of ADHD are everything that promotes low blood sugar. So and also torporific hormones. So under eating, not eating enough sugar, and also sunlight deficiency, and also inflammatory food items like common wheat, which alone the gluten is highly inflammatory because when the body experiences inflammation, it also releases stress hormones in order to mobilize sugar and other nutrients to help cells handle inflammation. And there's also another like a additive to common wheat called thiamine mononitrate, which is to fortify wheat with thiamine. Thiamine is required by our bodies to metabolize carbohydrate, but the nitrate part of thiamine mononitrate is a very potent mitochondrial respiration inhibitor. And mitochondrial respiration is how our body produces energy. So if you have if you have exposure to compounds that inhibit respiration, your body produces less energy. It then releases stress hormones in order to pump up the amount of energy that you're making. So even eating just common wheat can fuel ADHD or even cause ADHD, both because of the gluten content, which we can't really digest very well, but also because of additives like thiamine mononitrate that promote a decline in mitochondrial respiration. And the other factors also if you eat a lot of yogurt, like lactic acid directly lowers metabolic respiration, so then your body would respond to that by increasing adrenaline expression. So there can be a lot of dietary factors like that. And then sunlight also, so sunlight knocks nitric oxide off of mitochondria as well. And when you're not getting enough sunlight, nitric oxide gradually migrates to mitochondria to turn them off as part of a adaptive survival mechanism for us human beings during times of reduced light availability, such as wintertime. Because that's also associated with reduced availability of food in the environment. So even just not getting enough sunshine can really promote ADHD as well. I think the epidemic of ADHD in our country is mostly caused by not enough sunlight exposure and consumption of wheat and yogurt mostly. Um, so yeah. So if you have if you have ADHD, you can fix it really quickly. Actually, it's not hard to do. It's just that most people, like, there's a streamer that I watch all the time and love, and I won't say his name because he's smaller, but he has ADHD, and I've actually tried to like contact him and help a little bit, but but famous people, streamers, um uh they don't want people contacting them and offering help. And basically, like, like, it's just so common for like young men to like be inside all day long. And like, he's also experiencing like significant hair loss because the same stress problems and sunlight deficiency that underlie conditions like ADHD also promote hair loss. I actually have had some shedding this winter because I moved to Utah and I spent this entire winter indoors. And I talk about in my book how hair loss is mediated through these problems as well, because the rise in torporific hormones and reduction and stress hormones cut off blood supply to the scalp. And then that inhibits this pathway called the kynurenine pathway that underlies hair growth, but also helps our body make and use energy. So ADHD is a big problem for that. And that would be very relevant also to wanting to achieve states of happiness, like when you have conditions like that. Like, and that's what like the entire first part of my stream was about, when I talked about like, vitality as being the first requisite for a state of happiness. You have to have compassion for your body and treat it well and help and fix hormone imbalances in order to find vitality so that you can be relaxed and enjoy your life. I used to have this sort of sensation or problem when I love movies and I love going to the movie theater. I mean, it's so much fun to go to the movies. But all throughout my young adulthood, like every time I would go to a movie, like we'd get popcorn, we'd go sit in the dark theater, and then I'd be like sitting there through the previews, and like immediately before the movie even started, my brain and body would start to go like, oh my God, I can't wait till this is over. Even if it was like a movie that I like really enjoyed and was like really excited to go see, I would just be God, I can't sit still. I just want to leave and go do something else, and this is miserable and I don't want to be here. And that's exactly this experience. Like, stress hormones motivate action. Like, that's part of their purpose in our body, is to get us to go explore and discover, because that increases our likelihood of finding novel sources of food or stimulation and companionship and discovery. That's why it does that. So like, having ADHD, like a lot of people want to medicate ADHD and talk about people with ADHD as if like it's a flaw that they can't sit still and pay attention, but that's how our body works. Like, that's what stress hormones are supposed to do. Like, that's actually part of our healthful human biology and the function of those pathways. But then the reason that we have it and it can be such a problem because of our contemporary lifestyles and institutional orientation is because stress hormones motivate action. So if you resolve the sources of that inflammation and stress hormone stimulus, then ADHD just goes away. And now I just sit sometimes. Not sometimes, like a lot. Like I just sit and when I go outside to get sunshine, like I can just sit in the sun. And that was not something that I used to be able to do when I was younger. I always had to go for a jog or like ride a bike or like go to the beach. And even when I was at the beach, I couldn't enjoy it. I couldn't even sit still when I was at the beach. I'd have to get up and play Frisbee and like go swim in the water and like, but now I can just like sit and enjoy it and actually like be present. And that's because my diet and behaviors facilitate reduction in stress hormones and torporific hormones, which raises my metabolic respiration and produces more energy. And like I mentioned in the first of the stream, like Ray Peat talks about high energy producing individuals are more calm, because the more energy your body can produce, the more calm you feel. This is demonstrated specifically in extreme circumstances such as death and rigor mortis, when tissues run out of energy, they become stiff. They literally become stiff, like rigor mortis after you die and your body freezes. That is literally a consequence of not having any energy in there. And if you inject dead tissue with ATP, which is our energy molecule, it will soften and become pliable again. And that's not like so the ability to sit still is literally not a psychological discipline. It is literally a function of biological energy production and its effects on cells and their ability to thrive. Yeah. So yeah, just sunshine, avoid wheat, avoid yogurt, and eat lots of fruits and vegetables and everything else that I talk about in my book and other work and stuff like that. So yeah, anyway. All right. Well, hey, that was really fun. I don't think I talked about everything I wanted to talk about in happiness, but it's been 2.5 hours already. So we'll say goodbye. Thank you all for hanging out. Thank you for supporting my work. Again, my update will be out soon. The links are in the description here. What else? Is that all? I think that's all. Really, yeah. I'm gonna do a stream on cystic fibrosis when I release the update as well. A big stream on cystic fibrosis. But that's even if you don't have cystic fibrosis, it will have much relevant information for you because that greatly involves the immune system, especially, and copper actually. A lot of you might know my book doesn't really talk about copper, but the update will because of all the new stuff that I have discovered about the function of copper. So don't miss that stream. Anyway, have a good weekend. And remember to be kind to yourself and treat yourself with compassion and patience. And look into resolving your control mechanisms and get down and practice inventory therapy. Do it. It will save you so much stress in your life. Promise you. Great stuff. And it's a lot easier than what you're doing right now. Promise you that. So, yeah. Anyway, goodbye.